For years, America had been part of British childhoods long before they ever set foot there. It was the yellow school buses, the houses with front lawns, the flags on the porches, and the high school football fields glowing under the lights on Friday nights. Yet they still believed Hollywood had exaggerated it all. Then the plane landed. Outside the window, the images that had once existed only on a screen suddenly became real. A roadside mailbox was enough to make them stop. A quiet neighborhood made them feel as though they had stepped onto a movie set. And when a yellow school bus drove past, all they could say was, "It really exists." To Americans, these may be nothing more than ordinary sights. But in the eyes of these visitors, they were part of an entire world they had dreamed about since childhood. They came to find out whether America was really like it appeared in the movies. Just a few days later, the question had changed. What was it about this place that made them no longer want to go home? The moment they realized Hollywood hadn't made it up. There is a moment that almost every British traveler remembers for a long time after visiting America for the first time. It is not when they stand in front of a skyscraper or see a famous landmark. It is often simply the moment when a yellow school bus drives past. They stop, take out their phones, and stare after it as if they have just seen something unbelievable. For years, that bus had existed only in movies and childhood memories formed on the screen. But then the door opens, children step inside, the warning lights begin to flash, and they realize that this is not a Hollywood prop. This is an ordinary morning in America. And the bus is only the beginning. A few blocks farther, they see mailboxes with red flags standing by the roadside. Some people once thought they were merely details added to make the scene look very American. But those mailboxes are actually used every day. They stand in front of homes with garages, private driveways, neatly cut lawns, and sometimes an American flag flying from the porch. To Americans, it is simply the neighborhood where they grew up, where children ride their bicycles home before dinner. But to visitors from across the Atlantic, the entire scene feels like a movie stepping out of the screen. Then they begin to notice the smaller things: red fire hydrants, stop signs at every intersection, and wide, quiet streets. Every detail that seemed to exist only to fill the background in movies turns out to serve a real purpose and to belong to a system that operates every day. That is when their surprise turns into a larger realization. Hollywood did not invent the feeling of something being very American. Hollywood simply recorded what already existed. But perhaps the most powerful moment comes when they step into an American high school. In front of them are the football field, the bleachers, the scoreboard, the cheerleading squad, and the marching band. Everything looks exactly like the movies they have watched, except for one thing. There are no cameras, no actors, and no one is waiting for a director to call action. Those students really do practice after school. Parents really do sit in the bleachers. The band really does begin to play when the football team runs onto the field. And on a weekend evening, the entire community may gather there, not to make a movie, but to cheer for their children, their friends, and their town. For many British visitors, that is the moment when America no longer simply looks like a movie. It becomes a place with its own rhythm of life, memories, and real people living inside those familiar images. Perhaps many Americans have never thought there was anything special about the school bus outside their home, the school football field, or the flag on the porch. But thousands of miles away, millions of people grew up seeing those very images and wondering whether they were real. Now these travelers have their answer. They are not only real, they are also more vivid, more familiar, and more emotional than anything the screen ever showed them. And just when they think they have seen the most impressive side of America, another shock begins. Here, almost everything seems to be bigger than they imagined. The shock of discovering that everything really is bigger, after realizing that America truly looked like what they had seen on screen. British travelers encountered another shock, something no movie could fully convey: the true scale of everything here. It often begins with a very simple trip. They just want to stop by a supermarket to buy a few bottles of water and some food for the journey. But the moment the automatic doors open, they feel as though they have just walked into a shopping mall. The aisles stretch out before them. A section devoted entirely to cereal offers more choices than an entire small shop back home. Potato chips come in flavors they never imagined existed. Soft drinks, candy, household goods, clothing, medicine, and electronics are all found under the same roof. They went in to buy water. Nearly an hour later, they are still standing among the shelves, wondering how Americans can choose between dozens of versions of the same product. Then comes the meal. When the server places a drink on the table, one of them looks at it and asks, "Is this meant for one person?" The cup is so large that they have to hold it with both hands, and the plate of food looks like a portion meant for an entire family. At first there is laughter, then amazement, and finally a familiar remark, "We're going to have to take half of this back to the hotel." For many Americans, it is simply a normal meal, but for visitors from Britain, it creates an almost unbelievable sense of generosity. Here, even the invitation to have a little more seems to be built on an entirely different scale. When they leave the restaurant, the shock is still not over. The parking lot is filled with pickup trucks, SUVs, Mustangs, and vehicles so tall that a family car from Britain suddenly looks like a toy beside them. But the farther they travel, the more they realize that these vehicles are not chosen merely to impress. They carry entire families over long distances and tow boats, mobile homes, or work equipment. In a country where two places described as close to each other may still be hours apart by car, the automobile is not simply a means of transportation. For many people, it is part of their work, family life, and freedom of movement. Then they enter the highway. 6 lanes open up before them. Road signs continually point towards cities hundreds of miles apart. The landscape changes from residential neighborhoods to open plains, and then from plains to mountains, while the road continues to stretch onward. That is when they understand why Americans have drive-thrus, enormous parking lots, and the habit of driving somewhere just to buy a cup of coffee. Many places in America are not designed to be measured in footsteps. They are measured in hours spent behind the wheel. But then at the end of those roads, they see an entirely different kind of vastness. Homes with multiple rooms, garages large enough for 2 cars, front yards, backyards, and enough space for children or pets to run around. Some visitors laugh at how quiet it is. Others pause for longer, no longer seeing the houses as movie backdrops, but beginning to imagine themselves living there. And just when they think America cannot become any larger, the city disappears behind them. Ahead are mountain ranges, waterfalls, deep forests, vast lakes, and stretches of land reaching all the way to the horizon. In a single journey, they can see landscapes that feel like several different countries placed within the same borders. That is when everything is bigger, stops being a joke about a drinking cup or a pickup truck. It becomes the way they understand America. A country with too many roads to travel, too many landscapes to see, and too many different ways of life to discover during a short trip. But in the end, what they remember most is not the size of the supermarkets, the houses, or the mountains. It is the people they meet throughout the journey. What surprised them most wasn't the scenery. It was the American people. Perhaps what changed these British travelers the most was not the mountains, the roads, or the neighborhoods that looked like movie sets. It began with a very simple question from a complete stranger. "Do you need any help?" They were simply standing by the roadside, looking at a map and trying to find a place. But the man walking past did not just point ahead. He stopped, explained the directions, and then recommended a restaurant that tourists as rarely knew about. Those few minutes of conversation were enough to make them feel that they did not have to figure everything out alone in a foreign country. At the restaurant, the server noticed their British accents and asked where they were from. One question led to a few stories, then to recommendations for dishes and places that only locals knew. When they returned for a second visit, the server still remembered what they had ordered and even joked that they should have a box ready for the leftovers to take back to the hotel. What surprised them was not only the politeness, but the willingness to take the initiative. The Americans they met did not wait to be asked to babachimon before speaking up. They pulled over an extra chair, offered to take a photo for them, explained how to park, or simply said, "Welcome to our town." Each small gesture began to break down the images the travelers had carried with them. Through the news and social media, America sometimes appeared to be a cold, dangerous, and divided place. But that was still not the whole story. Beyond the major headlines were countless ordinary encounters that would never appear on television. A stranger giving directions, a family inviting newcomers to sit at their table, or a neighbor ready to lend a hand. Those moments helped them understand that real life in America was far broader than the image they had seen from a distance. Then the offers of help began to turn into invitations. They were invited to a performance, encouraged to join local events, and welcomed into holiday celebrations with families they had never met before. They were no longer standing outside and observing American culture. The people pulled them inside, offered them food, introduced them to friends, and treated them as though they had been there for years. But the clearest proof came from the mother traveling with the group. She had been brought to America so she could see for herself the place where her children wanted to build a new life. At first, she was simply a cautious visitor. Yet after only a few days, there were already people who remembered her name, started conversations with her, and wanted to stay in touch. She had come to verify her children's stories, but in the end, she was the one who settled in the fastest. By then, America was no longer just a collection of beautiful places to photograph. It had faces, voices, and farewell hugs. A short trip began to feel as though they were leaving behind people they had known for a long time. The scenery made them take out their phones and start recording. But it was the people who made them put their phones away, stay a little longer, and ask themselves, if a foreign place could make them feel this welcome, could it one day become home? They discovered an America built around family and community. At first, they thought they were simply attending a local festival in Tennessee. But when they looked around, they realized this was not merely a place to eat or listen to music. Children were running across the grass. Parents stood beside food stalls. Grandparents sat in folding chairs, talking with people they may have known for years. Teenagers performed, helped prepare the stage, or wore their school colors. Every generation seemed to have a place in that picture. For the British visitors, what made the event memorable was not how large it was. It was the fact that no one was left out. An ordinary afternoon had become a place where the entire town created memories together. That feeling appeared again on Friday night when the lights over the high school football field came on. On the field were students competing. Along the sidelines were the cheerleaders and the band. In the stands were not only parents, but also teachers, former students, young children, and local residents who came simply because it was their town's team. The visitors came to watch a game, but they quickly realized that winning was not the only thing that mattered. The child in the stands was looking at the people they might one day become. The father was cheering for his son. The former student had returned to the place that once held the memories of his youth, and the entire community was expressing something without needing to say it aloud. These children belong to us, this school belongs to us, and this story will continue after the game is over. Then, the following morning, that same spirit appeared in a simpler form. In front of a house, a family had placed books, toys, clothes, and old tools out on the lawn. Neighbors stopped by, not only to buy something, but also to ask how they were doing and have a conversation. An item no longer needed by one person could begin a new life in another family. In some places, people simply left things outside with a sign that said "free" and trusted that whoever truly needed them would take them. It was not a grand moment, but it showed that community did not exist only at festivals. It lived in small exchanges, in a ladder being lent out, a house being watched over, and a meal being brought to someone when a neighbor was going through a difficult time. The more towns they traveled through, the more they noticed the symbols that appeared everywhere. The flag on the porch, shirts bearing the name of the local team, school signs, and the way people spoke the words "our town." The pride here was not directed only toward a vast nation. It began with the street, the school, and the community each person called home. Then the holiday seasons made that feeling even clearer. On Halloween, entire neighborhoods opened their doors so children could have a night to remember. At Christmas, the lights on individual houses came together to form a shared tradition. And on the 4th of July, children, parents, and grandparents stood beneath a sky filled with fireworks, surrounded by music, food, and flags waving in the wind. What moved the visitors was not only the scene before them, it was the fact that these memories were not created by a company or a movie. They were maintained by thousands of ordinary families year after year. Of course, not every neighborhood was close-knit and not everyone knew their neighbors well, but the instinct to help, participate, and create a shared place had not disappeared. They had once thought they came to America to observe a culture, but the longer they stayed, the more they realized that the people here did not simply allow them to stand outside and look in. Amid the sound of the school band, the chairs placed side by side on the grass, and the fireworks above an unfamiliar town, they began to feel that this community was making room for them as well. The vacation that changed the way they saw their future. There is a moment that is very difficult to recognize, when a trip is no longer simply a trip. It does not happen in front of a famous landmark. It appears when they drive slowly through a quiet neighborhood, watch children playing in their front yards, and suddenly say, "I can imagine myself living here." Just a few days earlier, they were still stopping to film the yellow school buses and the houses that looked like those in the movies. But now they no longer look at those homes as tourists. They begin to wonder what an ordinary morning in this place would be like. Where would they buy groceries? How far would work be from home? Could they adapt to having to drive almost every day? And more importantly, is this where they would want their children to grow up? Those questions mark a major shift. America is no longer just a place to explore for a few weeks. It begins to become a possibility for the future. They look at neighborhoods with front yards, schools, and community activities and imagine a more stable life. A place where children could join sports teams, grow up surrounded by neighborhood traditions, and be watched over by several generations. What once surprised them now begins to make them long for it. They also want their loved ones to see the America they have experienced. Not the America on the screen or in the headlines, but the America of shared meals, greetings from strangers, and towns where a new arrival can still be offered an extra chair. That is why the mother's presence carries special meaning. She came to understand why her children kept talking about Tennessee. She wanted to know whether this was simply the excitement left over from a trip or truly a place where they could build a life. But when she herself was welcomed, made new friends, and felt comfortable within a completely unfamiliar community, the dream no longer belonged only to the younger generation. It began to become a future the whole family could imagine. Nashville and Tennessee also gradually took on a different meaning. The familiar roads, the restaurants they returned to, and the faces whose names they had learned were no longer just stops along the journey. They became things they already missed, even while they were still there. They began calling this place their spiritual home, not because it was where they were born, but because they felt that a different version of their lives could begin here. But then their excitement collided with reality. Wanting to live in America was not as simple as booking another plane ticket. They had to think about work, income, housing, insurance, transportation, and the distance from their family in Britain. They began looking into whether their skills could help them build careers there. Then came the hardest question: how could they legally stay? The more they researched, the more they realized there was no simple door for people who wanted to move to America simply because they loved it. Every path came with conditions, paperwork, time, and uncertainty. There were confusing terms, worrying expenses, and advice that left them unsure which sources they could trust. The dream suddenly became far more complicated, but what stood out was that they did not stop searching. By this point, they were no longer asking whether America was perfect. They had seen the inconveniences, the distances, and the sacrifices they would have to make. They knew that moving would mean starting over and leaving loved ones behind, and yet they still wanted to try. At first, they came to America to find out whether the images they had seen in movies were real. Now, as the day of their return drew closer, that question had completely changed. It was no longer whether America matched their dream. It was what they had to do so that one day they could call this place home, the day they had to leave and realized they no longer wanted to. The final morning in Tennessee began with a sound no one wanted to hear, the sound of a suitcase being zipped shut. Clothes were neatly folded. Souvenirs were placed into the remaining spaces. The room that had once been filled with laughter and plans for the next day gradually became quiet. Just a few minutes earlier, it had still felt like a temporary home. Now it was returning to being an unfamiliar hotel room. During their final breakfast, no one was particularly excited by the enormous portions anymore. They ordered the dishes they had come to love, but the conversation quickly turned to the things they had not had time to do. Perhaps one more week still would not have been enough. Even 1 month might not have been enough. They remembered the roads stretching across Tennessee, the quiet neighborhoods, the lights over the football field, and the people who had called them by name as though they were no longer strangers. But what made the entire group fall silent was not the list of places they had not visited. It was the question no one could answer with certainty: when would they be able to return? On the drive to the airport, the images that had excited them when they first arrived appeared once again outside the window. A yellow school bus passed by. Mailboxes stood in front of the lawns. A flag moved gently on a porch. The road signs pointing toward Nashville slowly disappeared behind them. At the beginning of the trip, everything had seemed so unfamiliar that they had to take out their phones and record it. But now those same images created a different feeling. They had become familiar, close, almost like things they were used to seeing every day. Then the goodbyes began. There were hugs that lasted longer than expected, promises to stay in touch, messages reminding them that they had to come back soon. The mother traveling with the group left America with more friends than she had when she arrived, and those who had once come here only as tourists left with the feeling that they were leaving a part of their lives behind. The plane ticket still carried them back to their homeland, but at the moment Tennessee disappeared beyond the window, they understood that home does not always have only one address. They were ready to return to the people waiting for them in Britain. But their hearts had already begun looking toward the next journey, because they had been ready to return to America for a long time. They had simply never been truly ready to leave. When foreign eyes see what Americans are beginning to forget, the America they saw was not a perfect place. Life here can be expensive. The vast distances make people dependent on cars. A larger home also comes with more bills. And not every community is as close-knit as the towns they visited. But none of that could erase what they had experienced. It was the stranger willing to stop and help. The family that pulled up an extra chair for a new guest. The football field where the entire town came together to cheer for its children. The roads that opened toward mountains, rivers, and thousands of possibilities ahead. Perhaps they did not love America because the country was perfect. They loved it because the things that had once existed only on a screen suddenly became real, familiar, and within reach. And sometimes outsiders can see most clearly the things that those living there have become too accustomed to notice. So, as an American, what part of your everyday life do you think would amaze a foreign visitor the most? And do you still appreciate it the way they did?